All right, if you're studying sports law, this is one of those cases you absolutely have to know. O'Bannon versus the NCAA. It's not just another lawsuit. This is the one that really cracked the foundation of college sports. For the first time ever, a federal court looked at the NCAA's sacred cow of amateurism and said, hey, that actually violates antitrust law. To understand how we got to today's world of name, image, and likeness, you've got to start here. So let's dive in.
So picture this. It's 2008. Ed O'Bannon, who was a superstar at UCLA, is just hanging out at a friend's house. They're playing a college basketball video game, and he sees it. An avatar. It looks just like him. It's a lefty just like him, it's on his old UCLA team, and it's even wearing his number, 31. Now, you could imagine Ed O'Bannon never gave permission for this, and he certainly didn't get a single dime for it. And that one moment sparked this massive question that was going to shake up the entire world of college sports. The NCAA's rules said he couldn't get paid for his name, image, and likeness. But was that rule itself actually illegal? So to figure out how the court handled that, we're going to walk through the whole case. We'll start with that video game lawsuit, then get into the big legal fight between antitrust law and amateurism. We'll break down the specific rule of reason test the court had to use, and then, of course, we'll cover the verdict and the massive legacy this case leaves behind. Okay, so let's start with that spark, that moment in front of the TV. It wasn't just some personal slight to Ed O'Bannon. It became the legal catalyst for a huge class action lawsuit that really would change everything. So in 2009, the lawsuit was filed. And O'Bannon's argument was, it was simple, but it was incredibly powerful. He basically said the NCAA and its member schools were acting like a cartel. They were all getting together to illegally fix the price for an athlete's name, image, and likeness at zero. And that, he argued, was a classic violation of federal antitrust law. And that lawsuit just set the stage for this massive legal showdown. On one side, you've got the foundational law of American free market competition, and on the other, you have this century-old, almost sacred tradition of amateurism in college sports. The weapon of choice here was the Sherman Antitrust Act. It goes all the way back to 1890. Its whole purpose is to stop monopolies and prevent powerful groups from ganging up to hurt competition. The argument from O'Bannon's side was that the NCAA's NIL rules were a textbook example of this. All these powerful schools colluding to price fix what they would pay athletes for their likenesses at zero. Now, the NCAA's whole defense rested on this idea of amateurism. But as you can see from this timeline, what amateurism means has never been set in stone. In fact, the court called it malleable. Just look, in 1948, athletic scholarships were banned, but just 8 years later, they were allowed. And by the time this case rolled around, they'd been expanded again. This history made it really tough for the NCAA to argue that any new form of payment would just suddenly destroy the whole system. Now, this wasn't a simple case where the court could just look at the rules and say, yep, that's illegal. Because in an industry like college sports, some agreements between competitors are actually necessary for the product to even exist. So instead, the court had to use a specific three-step balancing act called the rule of reason test. Here's kind of how it works. First, the plaintiffs, that's O'Bannon's side, had to prove that the NCAA's rules actually hurt competition. If they could do that, then the burden of proof would shift to the NCAA to show that no, these rules actually have some legitimate pro-competitive benefits. And then if the NCAA could prove that, the burden shifted one last time, back to the plaintiffs, to show that there was a better, less restrictive way to achieve those same benefits. All right, so let's walk through it. Step 1. Did the rules actually cause any harm to competition? Well, to even answer that, the first thing O'Bannon's lawyers had to do was define what market we were even talking about. The court landed on what it called a college education market, where top schools are all competing to recruit the best athletes. And it totally agreed with the plaintiff's view of this market. It saw the NCAA's rules as a classic price-fixing scheme, where all the schools got together and agreed to set the price for an athlete's NIL at zero. This directly harmed the sellers, the athletes, by stopping them from earning what they were worth. Okay, so harm to competition was established. The burden now officially shifts. The ball is in the NCAA's court to justify its rules. And they came forward with 4 main arguments for why banning NIL payments was actually a good thing for competition. So here's how that shook out. The court pretty much flat out rejected the NCAA's claims about promoting competitive balance and increasing output. But, and this is a big but, it did accept 2 of their arguments. It agreed that preserving amateurism was a valid goal, mostly because fans seemed to like it, and it also agreed that the rules helped integrate athletes with the rest of the student body. So this was kind of a partial win for the NCAA.
And that brings us to the final and really the most decisive step of the whole test. The court has said the NCAA has some good reasons for its rules. So the big question now was, could the NCAA still achieve its goals of preserving amateurism and integrating students, but in a way that was less restrictive than a total outright ban on any compensation? The plaintiffs came back with two key alternatives. First, they said, let schools give scholarships that cover the full cost of attendance, not just tuition and books, but actual living expenses. And second, let schools put up to $5,000 a year into a trust fund for an athlete, which they'd get after they left school as payment for using their NIL.
And this is where we land at the final verdict, which was a landmark for sure, but also a really divided ruling. The court did not just hand a complete win to either side. Instead, it looked at each of the plaintiffs' two proposed solutions and judged them separately. On one hand, the court affirmed allowing scholarships up to the full cost of attendance. This made total sense. I mean, even the NCAA's own president had testified that this wouldn't violate their definition of amateurism because it was tied to education. But, on the other hand, the court shot down the idea of the $5,000 deferred payments. It ruled that just giving athletes cash that wasn't tied to education, well, that was a bridge too far. And you really have to hear the court's own language on this because it's so powerful. The appeals court said the difference between education-related benefits and straight-up cash was not minor, it is a quantum leap. Basically, the court was worried that once you cross that line into pure cash payments, there's no logical stopping point, and college sports would just become pro-minor leagues, which would destroy the very thing amateurism was supposed to protect.
So, when the dust settled, what was the real legacy of this case? I mean, O'Bannon and the other athletes didn't get those direct cash payments they wanted. But the victory was still absolutely monumental. It fundamentally changed the legal power dynamic between the NCAA and its athletes forever. Look, if you remember just one thing from this whole explainer, make it this. For the very first time, a federal court established that the NCAA's economic rules were not somehow exempt from federal law. They could be challenged in court, and as it turns out, they could be found illegal. That whole aura of invincibility the NCAA had for decades, it was shattered. The O'Bannon case proved that while amateurism might be a valid goal, it was not a blank check for the NCAA to do whatever it wanted. From this point on, they'd have to justify the restrictions in court, just like any other business.
And that's really the ultimate legacy here. The O'Bannon case didn't create the NIL world we have today all by itself, but what it did was crack the dam. It proved the NCAA wasn't untouchable, and it laid the legal groundwork for all the future challenges, like the big one that went to the Supreme Court, the Alston case. The door was now wide open, which left everyone asking the question that continues to define college sports today: what would come through it next?